In this video, we are going to talk about top 10 richest countries in the world. So, before starting the video, please like this video. Do subscribe and turn on the notification to our channel for future updates. What comes to mind when people think of the world's richest nations? What comes to mind when they think of the world's smallest nations? Many of the world's wealthiest nations are also among the smallest. But what does it mean to be rich in an era of rising economic inequality? However, dividing gross domestic product, GDP, by the number of full-time residents provides a more accurate assessment of a country's population's wealth. The reason rich typically means small is that these countries' economies are vast relative to their populations. 10. Brunei Darussalam. Population, 0.4 million. GDP, PPP. $28.7 billion. 1.2% growth. 0.8% 5-year compound annual growth. $62,371 per capita. The Sultan of Brunei, Hassan al-Bolkiah, lives here and gets his $20,000 haircut. His fortune, gained from the country's vast oil and gas reserves, is estimated at $28 billion, more than 50 times that of Queen Elizabeth. But the Sultanate is not perfect, and not just because Bolkiah is no longer the world's wealthiest king. Thailand's King Maha Vajiralongkorn is roughly $15 billion richer. With a per capita purchasing power of almost $60,000 on paper, malnutrition is endemic in Brunei. Despite a lack of data, it is estimated that 40% of its 450,000 residents live below the poverty line. Fortunately, the COVID-19 epidemic was contained to a few hundred cases. After a 13-year high of 3.9% economic growth in 2019, it dipped to 1.2% in 2020 due to the pandemic-related drop in oil prices. 9. Macau SAR. It has a population of 683,000 people at the end of 2021. Many believed until recently that Asia's Las Vegas will soon become the world's richest nation. Instead, COVID hit, halting worldwide travel and knocking Macau out of the IMF's top 10. Macau is also the only country on the list whose purchasing power per capita is lower than it was before the pandemic. While things are not as they used to be, with mainland Chinese, Hong Kong and Taiwan tourists being allowed on the island, hotel bookings are up. Formerly a Portuguese colony, this special administrative zone of China has seen its income skyrocket when the casino industry was liberalized in 2001. With a population of over 600,000 and over 40 casinos spanning over 30 square kilometers, this small peninsula south of Hong Kong is a money-making powerhouse. 8. USA. Did the epidemic make us richer? Who, you ask? Those who lost their jobs and businesses, who had exorbitant medical bills and other expenses to pay, were not lining up at food pantries. Those earning over $60,000 per year and in the top quintile of the population were able to remain working from home, see their stock assets rise, and receive stimulus checks. Another narrative concerns how the wealthy fared during the health crisis. Between March 2020 and April 2021, the wealth of America's 719 billionaires increased by $1.62 trillion, or 55%, according to the Institute for Policy Studies. 7. Norway. Oil has powered Norway's economy since the late 1960s when substantial offshore reserves were discovered. As Western Europe's top oil producer, it has benefited from rising prices for decades. Then came the global pandemic, and the krone plummeted. The Norwegian plummeted 6.3% in the second quarter of that year, the most in half a century, and maybe since World War II. Does this indicate Norwegians are poorer than they were before the pandemic? No way. After the initial shock, the economy recovered and ended the year at minus 0.7%. Then, in 2021, it made up for lost ground, expanding by roughly 3%. Furthermore, Norwegians may always rely on the world's largest sovereign wealth fund, worth $1.3 trillion. Because Norway has one of the world's lowest income inequality gaps, high per capita GDP estimates truly represent people's financial well-being. 6. UAE. This Persian Gulf nation's economy was once based on agriculture, fishing, and pearl commerce. Then, in the 1950s, oil was discovered. Workers from all over the world are drawn to the city by tax-free salaries and year-round weather, to the extent that only about 20% of the people living in the country are actually locally born. The UAE economy is also getting more diversified. Tourism, building, trade, and banking are key businesses outside the core hydrocarbon industry. That doesn't mean the pandemic didn't affect the Emirates. For the first time in decades, the UAE fell off of the IMF's top 10 richest countries list. Its resurgence is mostly due to rising crude oil prices. The World Expo, which was postponed in 2020 owing to what, is also back until March 2022. 5. Switzerland. It's all about the Swiss Army knife. But also the immersion blender, Velcro, and LSD. The list goes on. These are only a few of Switzerland's contributions to the world. But now, this 8.6 million person nation owes much of its income on banking and insurance, tourism, and exports like pharmaceuticals, gems and precious metals, precise instruments, and machinery, from watches to medical apparatuses and computers. Is it surprising that Switzerland has the world's greatest millionaire density? According to Credit Suisse's 2017 Global Wealth Report, 14.9% of adults own assets worth over $1 million. What is the difference? According to the IMF, this is due to the Swiss economy's strong public and household finances, competitive export industries, and low reliance on contact-intensive sectors. 4. Qatar. Despite the recent rebound, oil prices have been falling steadily and occasionally dramatically since the mid-2010s. Qatar's per capita GDP was above $143,222 in 2014, but just $97,846 a year later, and is now barely above that level. In spite of its small population, 2.8 million, the country's vast oil, gas, and petrochemical reserves have kept it atop the world's wealthiest nations list for 20 years. Despite this, COVID-19 grew quickly in Qatar, as it did in many other Gulf states, among low-income migrant laborers living in close quarters. Despite repeated quarantines, curfews, and lockdowns, Qatar has one of the highest percentages of positive cases in the area. Despite this, the economy has showed some resilience, contracting by only 3.5% in 2020 and growing by about 2% in 2021, with a forecast comeback due to increased gas output and investment ahead of the 2022 World Cup. 3. Singapore. The richest person in Singapore is 93-year-old Goh Cheng Liang, founder of one of the world's largest paint manufacturers, with a net worth of $21.7 billion. Eduardo Saverin, the co-founder of Facebook, came in third with assets of almost $15 billion, having departed the US in 2011 with 53 million shares of the firm and become a permanent resident of the island nation. Saverin chose Singapore for its tax-free capital gains and dividends, not merely its urban and environmental appeal. But how did Singapore get so rich? Half of the city population states were illiterate in 1965. Singapore, a country with few natural resources, became one of the world's most business-friendly locations via hard work and wise legislation. And it's all thanks to Singapore. Most importantly, 98% of the adult population is now literate. In 2020, the GDP shrank by a record 5.4%, plunging the country into recession for the first time in over a decade. 2. Ireland. Ireland felt unstoppable recently. While the rest of Europe was reeling from Brexit, trade tensions with the US, and refugee and migration crises, the Irish economy was humming. In 2019, Ireland's economy grew by almost 4.9%, making it the fastest-growing country in the Eurozone. It's only natural to suppose the COVID changed that. But Ireland bucked forecasts again, growing 5.8% in 2020 and more than double that in 2021, 13%, according to the IMF. Ireland, a 5 million-strong nation, was one of the worst hit by the 2008 financial crisis. Following politically challenging reform measures including slashing public sector wages and reforming its banking industry, the island nation's fiscal health improved, employment rates increased, and its per capita GDP nearly doubled. 1. Luxembourg. In 2021, the GDP was $86,708 million. Visitors to Luxembourg can enjoy castles and stunning scenery, as well as gourmet delights. Or, as many do, open an offshore account with one of its banks and never leave. It's a pity because this 630,000-strong nation has much to offer both tourists and people. Luxembourg invests much in housing, healthcare, and education for its citizens, who enjoy the highest quality of life in the Eurozone. Unlike the global financial crisis and the EU and OECD's pressure to remove banking secrecy, the coronavirus pandemic prompted many firms to close and workers to lose jobs. So, that's it for today's video. What are your thoughts on our video? Please let us know in comments section below. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear from me again, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification to our channel before you go. Thank you so much for watching.